Hello, everybody. This is Terry, Community Manager with special guest Mikayla Dalton, Fertility Awareness Method Instructor. Welcome, Mikayla.
Thanks, Terry. Hi, everyone.
I'm really excited because we're doing Myth Busting Part 2. And if this keeps being awesome, we may just keep going with this, Part 3, Part 4, I don't know. So today we have some myths in mind that we're going to go over with you. And if you have any follow-up questions, since we're live, go ahead and ask your questions. I'll be keeping an eye out for those. And if you have some myths that you'd like to see in future videos, please share those also in the comments below. So let's get started.
Right.
The first question, myth we want to address is you can get pregnant in menopause.
Right. I saw this recently and I was confused. I was like, I realized it was a blog post somewhere on the internet. There was a blog post. And it was giving the impression that you could get pregnant after menopause, probably scaring a lot of people and also giving other people a lot of false hope. So you can't. Once you've entered menopause, unless you do something to artificially take yourself out of that situation, you can't conceive. It's just you're not possible to get pregnant. The whole point of menopause is that you stop your reproductive cycles and you stop ovulating, you stop being able to have babies, and it's onto a whole different phase of life. So menopause means the cessation of menstrual bleeding, and it's not because you have PCOS or anything like that. It's you've stopped your menstrual bleeding because you've stopped ovulating for the rest of your life. So this usually happens around the early 50s on average. About 1% of women in the Western world, at least going by the research, get an early menopause. And about 1% of women are in menopause by the age of 40, but the average is in the early 50s. And it means you're not going to get periods anymore because you've stopped ovulating. And if you have stopped ovulating, you cannot get pregnant. That's just it. I think what the blog post was getting confused about was perimenopause, or sometimes called premenopause. And you can get pregnant in the years prior to menopause. So you might think that that stage of your life is over because you haven't had a period for a while. It might have been 6 months. You know, you're of a certain age and you're like, oh, that's it. You know, I've seen my cycles changing. I haven't been ovulating very much. I must be done now. But you might still have another couple of eggs still to be released in your lifetime before your body moves on. So you can get pregnant prior to menopause, but once you've gone a whole year without ovulating and without getting your period, then that's pretty much done.
Well, that's a good marker to note.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, this next one is about menstrual cups and using them to increase your chances of getting pregnant. What are your thoughts on that?
There's no evidence for this. So it's an interesting one to do like true or false or myth or fact on, because we don't have a lot of research to tell us whether it works or not. So I will choose a side and I will say that it is mostly myth. Because frankly, the sperm, when sperm are deposited in the vaginal tract, up near the up near the cervix, the seminal fluid forms a kind of little, what's a nice way to describe this? Sort of, I want to use the word gelatinous, but that always sounds so weird. A kind of sticky, smooth substance up near the cervix, which kind of protects the sperm for a while. Good cervical fluid will protect them as well. And they're microscopic. They move pretty fast. You don't really need to keep the seminal fluid up there to help them stay there. It shouldn't help. What it could do, though, is if you're using it, and I don't know how long people might want to keep a menstrual cup in to keep the seminal fluid and the sperm up near the cervix. But if you do that for too long, you run certain risks, like with your health, with bacteria. I mean, your body is designed to clear this out. You could change the pH of your vaginal tract, especially if you're using it when you're not in the fertile phase. The vaginal tract is naturally acidic, and sperm prefer an alkaline environment. So seminal fluid is more alkaline. And so then you're messing with the pH inside you. So it has a couple of concerns with it, and we have no evidence that that would work at all. And generally speaking, the little sperm don't need a lot of help to, the ones that are capable of getting where they need to go don't really need assistance to keep them in that direction. The amount of time they're there already should be sufficient. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not necessarily helpful, and you wouldn't even recommend it personally.
I wouldn't recommend it personally. No. I have some concerns with doing that on a regular basis. Yeah. Menstrual cups are great for their intended purpose, but I'm not sure I would branch out from that.
Okay. The next one is you can ovulate twice a cycle.
I'm going to surprise everyone and say, true, you can ovulate twice. You can release 2 eggs.
Wow.
You can release 2 eggs in a cycle, but they're going to be released at close to the same time. What can't happen is ovulating once, say on cycle day 13 or 14, and then ovulating again on cycle day 25. You can peak twice. And I think sometimes people get confused. They might see a couple of peaks in a cycle and be like, oh, I ovulated twice, because peak equals ovulation. But what's going to have happened is that one of those peaks was a genuine ovulation and the other was not. So you can peak twice, but you can't ovulate at 2 different times in the cycle. The reason you can't do this is because once you have released an egg, your body increases its production of progesterone. The little follicle the egg came out of, it gets a new name. It gets called a corpus luteum, which sounds really fancy, but it's an empty follicle that the egg came out of. That starts to pump out progesterone levels. That tells your body that you've ovulated and triggers a change in your uterine lining to help prepare the lining to be more receptive to implantation. And that is also what raises your basal body temperature. So if you're temping and you see that on your Premom chart and you see that rise in temperature, it's because you've ovulated and your body is producing progesterone, and that raises your resting body temperature. Progesterone hinders the other reproductive hormones. So you're not going to have the follicle development that is the kind of development that leads to an egg release. So that's why you can't ovulate twice, because your body tells you that you've ovulated and it's preparing for a possible pregnancy. It's busy doing that. So it's not going to waste resources on releasing another egg because it's already done it. So it's waiting for the next step. It's preparing for a possible pregnancy. And if you don't get pregnant, then it clears out, you get your menstrual period, and it tries again. It's not trying again when you might already have conceived. Okay. There are a few strange stories floating around of double ovulation where, or superfetation. They're really, really hard to verify. And some of it may be down. There's a couple that one, maybe 2, where the woman was on reproductive hormones as part of a medical treatment to try to conceive. So it might be possible that with really strong assisted pregnancy interventions, that you might be able to override your body's natural defense against ovulating at 2 different times and gestating babies for at different times. So that might be theoretically possible. We haven't really got any good evidence for it, but there were a couple of interesting stories. But in general, in terms, there's also interesting stories about people getting pregnant after partial hysterectomies. So, yeah, that never makes it into efficacy statistics. It is so ridiculously rare. So, one in like billions of people, like that doesn't. So if you ever hear a funny story like that, I like to keep an open mind. There's no good evidence though. So functionally, like practically speaking, unusual, rare stories with medical interventions and things like that aside, no, you can't. You can release 2 eggs at the same hormonal ovulatory event though, and that's where fraternal twins come from. So the non-identical twins, that's because you released 1 egg from 1 ovary and then another egg, typically within the same 24-hour period. And both of them got fertilized. So you can ovulate twice in the sense that you can release 2 eggs, but you can't ovulate at different times. Yeah.
That was a fun twist.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is fertility awareness-based methods don't work for women with irregular cycles.
That's a bit of a long-standing myth, actually. I still hear that sometimes. Yeah, they can and they do. So the idea is that I think back in the day, back way in the day when we were working mainly with just calculations, if you had irregular cycles, it would be really difficult for a calculation to work. So that's the calendar rhythm method of the past. It was pretty good, surprisingly so, really. Like it gets a bad rap. It was pretty good considering, but modern fertility awareness-based methods are much more effective. And the good thing about them is they're much more flexible. So you can actually handle irregular cycles the way calculations weren't really able to do. So women with PCOS, women postpartum breastfeeding, women in perimenopause, like heading toward menopause, and that's when your cycles start to get quite wacky, they can all be handled with fertility charting methods. There's a bit less research on it because what happens is researchers go for the obvious targets first. So you're like, how does this work for women between the ages of 18 and 40 and in regular cycles? And so you do research from the ground up. So there's plentiful research on regular cycles. There's not as plentiful research on irregular cycles, but it does exist. It is there. For example, the researchers at Marquette University, their Institute for NFP, they've done a study on perimenopause and they've done a study on postpartum breastfeeding use, and both of those found good effectiveness around the 98, 99-ish level. Yeah.
That's great news. Yes. And then we have another one. I know this comes up a lot too, about BBT, attempt dip in the luteal phase or a triphasic chart signify pregnancy.
Yeah, that one's a myth. It's unfortunate. It'd be nice to have something chart-wise that would tip you off in that way. No, so attempt dip is sometimes called, when it comes after ovulation, like within the luteal phase, between ovulation and your next period, some people see a dip in temp and then it goes back up. And it's sometimes called an implantation dip, with the idea being that if you get pregnant, you might see a dip in your chart and then a rise again. But unfortunately, that's not a reliable sign because there are plentiful women who do get a dip in their chart and they are not pregnant and they had no chance of being pregnant. So it's not just a missed pregnancy that wasn't able to take. No, they had no chance of getting pregnant that cycle, but they get that little dip. I have a theory that it's due to increasing estrogen levels in the luteal phase because estrogen rises again in the second half of the cycle, not as high as it does before ovulation, but it does do another little hill. And it might be that as it rises, takes a little bit of a day for progesterone to balance it out again. But that's just a theory. I wouldn't take my word for it on that one. I don't know why for sure, but no, it's not a reliable sign of pregnancy, unfortunately. You still have to wait and test. And same with the triphasic chart. A triphasic chart is when you have a basal body temperature in one range before ovulation, and then it rises after ovulation, and that's your thermal shift. And then some people see a third rise even higher in the second half of the luteal phase. And that's your three-phasic phase of charts. Some people will say that after implantation, your body might ramp up that progesterone production even more, and that results in a higher temperature yet again. But we have lots of charts of women who did get successfully pregnant and did not see a triphasic chart at all. Their temperature rose and then it stayed up, but it didn't rise another time. And we see a number of ladies who are not pregnant and just get a triphasic chart just commonly. That's just their pattern. So unfortunately, there's no charting tip for pregnancy aside from just seeing that temp rise and then just seeing it stay up, and you're like 18 days, oh, I might need to take a test now.
Great. Yes, you do need to watch the VBT chart, but not the triphasic pattern. It depends on the person. Unfortunately,
yeah.
I think we have time to squeeze in one more.
Right.
And I think this is another important myth. So I'm interested to see what your take is on this one. You should have sex every day or even twice a day when you're trying to conceive.
That's a myth. I'm going to say that's a myth. That's putting way too much pressure on couples. You might want to baby dance, sometimes it's called. You might want to have sex more frequently, especially in your fertile window. The idea is that each act of intercourse when you're in the fertile window comes with a chance of pregnancy. So just doing it every day, all through your cycle, that's going to be exhausting. Good for you if you want to, but I don't think I could handle it. So you want to ideally target that fertile window, which is why you're charting. That's why you have your tests. That's why you have your BBT. That's why you might be observing cervical fluid, all of these things that you're doing. You're doing it so that you can identify the time that you're fertile. And if you're trying to conceive, if you're not charting, a good rule would just be to aim to have sex every second day. So if you ovulate on day 14, you may have had sex on day 10, 12, and 14. And so you have a good chance. If you ovulate on day 14 you were using odd days, you might have had sex on 11, 13, and 15. That's still a good chance, When you know that you're in the fertile phase, if you're trying to conceive, you don't have to restrict yourself to every other day. That can be helpful if the man has a very low sperm count. But for most men without a low sperm count, they can have sex every day without that impinging on their numbers of sperm and your ability to conceive. So you can have sex every day. You might want to target it for your very most fertile days. The idea is that every act of sex comes with its chance of pregnancy. And this is statistics. So it's hard to apply them to individuals because by nature, you get them from looking at a big group of people. So having intercourse on the day of ovulation comes with a roughly 30% chance of pregnancy. And the day before comes with a roughly 25% chance of pregnancy. And the day before that comes with a roughly 20% chance of pregnancy. So if you're having sex on multiple days, you're kind of stacking these probabilities in a statistical way. I won't do the math, right? You're not just adding them. So it's not 30% plus 25 equals 55. We're not doing that. It's a little more complicated, but you are increasing the chances. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was a lot of fun. And If you watched and you heard some myths that were helpful and you have some other ideas, please share those with us because we do want to keep doing this probably next month. And if you have any follow-up questions on these myths as well, please share those. Thank you again, Mikayla, for joining us today.
You're welcome, Terry. It's always a pleasure. It's great to see you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who watched today, either in person or on the recording, and we'll see you again soon.
Cheers.